Have you ever stopped to think about what economics is really about? I mean, is it just about money or the stock market or business? Well, what if I told you that for nearly a century now, the entire field has been shaped by one single powerful sentence, written all the way back in 1935? A definition that pretty much changed everything. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at why this was such a revolutionary redefinition. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the famous scarcity definition itself. After that, we're going to explore its really surprising philosophical foundation, this idea of using logic over experiments. And finally, we'll tackle its most controversial legacy, the notion of an economics that is completely separate from ethics. So, let's set the stage. You have to picture the early 20th century. Economics was kind of going through an identity crisis. It was trying so hard to be more precise, more rigorous, more scientific. But the big question was, what was it the science of? See, before this, definitions of economics were all about the things economists studied. They looked at wealth, how stuff gets made, how we use it. But a new wave of thinkers, including this brilliant guy from the London School of Economics named Lionel Robbins, they felt this was just way too narrow. It's kind of like defining biology as just the study of four-legged animals. You'd be missing a lot, right? And this is where Robbins just completely flips the script. He argued that pretty much any human action could have an economic side to it. Suddenly, economics wasn't about what we do, it was about the why behind our choices. And that was a total game changer. It meant choosing a career, deciding how to spend your afternoon, even fighting a war. All of it suddenly had an economic dimension. So this brings us right to the heart of the revolution, the definition itself. Because Robbins didn't just suggest a new focus, he laid out the basic fundamental conditions that make us think like economists in the first place. And here it is. This is the sentence that completely redefined a field of study. Economics is the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. Seriously, every single part of that definition is critical, and when you put them all together, they create this incredibly powerful and universal way of looking at the world. Okay, so let's unpack that. First, we have various ends. Basically, we want a ton of different things. Second, our means to get those things, our time, our money, our energy, they're limited, they're scarce. Third, those limited means have alternative uses. You can use this afternoon to study or to work or to just chill out. And because of those three facts, a fourth thing becomes totally unavoidable. We have to choose. We are forced to economize. And this shows you the boundaries perfectly. I mean, if you had unlimited time and money, there's no economic problem, right? Or if you had a resource that only had one single use, what Robbins called manna from heaven, there's no choice to make. The economic problem only pops up when scarcity and alternative uses crash into each other, forcing a trade-off. It doesn't matter if it's about your weekly schedule or your entire life's path. So what's the ultimate upshot of all this? It's huge. By focusing everything on this relationship between what we want and the limited tools we have to get it, Robbins basically defined economics as the universal science of rational choice. It became the study of how we logically try to get the most out of a world with infinite desires and finite resources. But wait a minute. This brings up a really big question. If economics is this universal science of choice, how do you figure out its laws? I mean, do you run experiments in a lab like a chemist? Well, according to Robbins, the answer to that is a hard no. And this is a really radical idea when you think about it. Robbins argued that the core principles of economics aren't things you find by looking through a microscope or mixing chemicals. No, they're logically deduced from just a few fundamental truths about being human. Truths that are so obvious, he thought, they don't even need to be proven. These are the basic building blocks. First, just the simple fact that you and I can rank our preferences. I'd rather have coffee than tea. That's it. Second, the idea that it takes different things to produce something, like you need land and you need labor. And third, the fact that we're all a bit uncertain about the future. From these super simple ideas, entire complex economic theories are built, step by logical step. And you got to appreciate the confidence here. Robbins called these simple and indisputable facts of experience. The idea that you can decide what you want more is not something you need to test in a lab. It's just something you know by virtue of being a person. It's self-evident. So this brings us to a fantastic analogy. In Robbins' view, economics works a lot more like geometry than chemistry. You start with a few basic truths, or axioms, like a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, and from that starting point, you can logically deduce a whole system of theorems. It's a science of pure reason. Okay, so now we get to the most debated, the most controversial part of Robbins's legacy. If economics is this purely logical science about the mechanics of choice, what can it possibly say about what we should do? What can it tell us about things like fairness or justice, or just plain old morality? Robbins drew a very, very hard line in the sand here. He said economics is a positive science. It can only describe what is. It can tell you if you do X, then Y will happen. But, he insisted, it can't be a normative science. It can't tell you what ought to be. That job, he said, belongs to the world of ethics, not economics. And this quote just nails the idea perfectly. For Robbins, economics is like a map. It can show you the fastest, most efficient route to get from point A to point B, but it can never, ever tell you whether you should go to point B. That decision requires a value judgment, and that's just outside the scope of science. And this has huge real-world consequences. Let's take something like progressive taxation, where wealthier people pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes. An economist can describe the effects of that policy, sure. They can talk about what it might do to investment or spending, but what they can't do as a scientist is say that it's a good or just policy. Why not? Because to do that, you'd have to somehow compare the happiness one person loses from that tax to the happiness another person gains. And Robbins believed that's an ethical comparison, something you just can't measure scientifically. And that, right there, leaves us with a massive, and I think a really profound question. Robbins gave economics this incredibly clear, powerful, scientific identity as the science of choice under scarcity. But in the process, did he also strip it of its ability to guide us on our most important questions as a society? If the science of how we deal with scarcity can't help us figure out what's fair, then what can?